to read Stephen King's The Shining for whoever watches this, probably just myself. And really it's an effort that I don't get too scared and that I kind of have like another purpose in life other than really reading this, and I can read it for an audience and hopefully suck it up and not be too afraid. But yeah, this is Stephen King's The Shining. It's an introduction by Ken Follett. Just kidding. It's by... Actually, that's backwards, right? So you can't even read that. That's how scary it is. They write it backwards. It's a collector's edition, and I'm actually already on chapter 10. So, if you want to read chapters 1 through 9, if you've never read The Shining, because it's amazing. This is the first Stephen King novel I ever picked up, and I can see why everybody heralds Stephen King's work. It's amazing. It's just leaves me speechless. So if you want to read chapters 1 through 9, you need to go buy the book, support Stephen King, and support literature and like hard copy books, because now there's ebooks everywhere, and that's bad for your eyes. Just let me say that. I'm just gonna read chapter 10. I'm not gonna go on anymore about how it's bad for your eyes to read off of like a screen all the time, but you know, that's neither here nor there. So, to get you up to date, there's a man, Jack, his wife, Wendy, and their son, Danny. Jack was a writer. He is a writer. He's working on a novel currently, and he was a prep school English professor, literature teacher. He had a really bad alcohol problem. I mean, a terrible, terrible alcohol problem. And Wendy, he was on the rocks with her. He has a friend that's also a teacher at that same school. They both go out and they're both alcoholics. One day they're driving back. His friend is driving back, and they're turning around a bend, and they hit a bicycle, and they see this bicycle flying. It's the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. So they stop, they pull over, and they start looking, and it says that they search for a good couple of hours, and they can't find a body. So they think, you know, where did that bicycle come from? Where's the child? They looked, they didn't see any sort of blood on the car. There was no anything of the sort to say that there was a child, but they were so scared that what if there had been one? And they looked for a few hours, but they never found one, so they went home. And then they both decided that it was the last time they were going to get clean. And so Wendy comes home and she says he had lost his job also, so he had become such a raging alcoholic that he had lost his job, and this kid was being a kid, and he basically told him off. And so Jack attacked him, and he lost his job. Anyways, Wendy was thinking about getting a divorce. There's that context, and then he tells her that he'll stop drinking. He says give him 2 weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, if she still wants to have this conversation, then they can. They never really talk about there being a divorce, but it's in everyone's minds, and we know this because of this little omniscient son of theirs. It's about, I would say, 5 years old, and he's different, and he was born with a caul on his face, which is a folklore saying, you know, the child's going to be different, and they're going to have this sight, and so Danny has this sight. He has a friend named Tony that appears to him, an imaginary friend or something only he can see, and he lapses into these little comas, if you will, where he can see the future, and Tony always comes and shows him what's going to happen. And you can tell that Tony he always brings up scary things that will happen, and it's in order to help Danny to overcome them, because his father, Jack, has such an anger problem and he's such an alcoholic. That's where we are in a nutshell. They just got to this hotel that Jack got a seasonal job at, and so they know that they're going to be there, and they might even be stranded there for several months because it'll get snowed in. And this hotel is called the Overlook, and it has a really bad history. The last caretaker that was there with his 2 daughters and his wife, and he had a drinking problem, and he basically got cabin fever, and he killed them. So there's all these hints that Tony's been giving Danny that the Overlook is a bad place and he shouldn't be there. And there's this thing called red rum, and his father is involved with it somehow, and it's a bad thing. And now we're at chapter 10, and they just got to the Overlook. Halloran. The cook didn't conform to Wendy's image of the typical resort hotel kitchen personage at all. To begin with, such a personage was called a chef. Nothing so mundane as a cook. Cooking was what she did in her apartment kitchen when she threw all the leftovers into a greased Pyrex casserole dish and added noodles. Further, the culinary wizard of such a place as the Overlook, which advertised in the resort section of the New York Sunday Times, should be small, rotund, and pasty-faced, rather like the Pillsbury Doughboy. He should have had a thin, pencil-lined mustache like a 40s musical comedy star, dark eyes, all French accent, and a detestable personality. Halloran had the dark eyes, and that was all. He was a tall black man with a modest afro that was beginning to powder white. He had a soft southern accent, and he laughed a lot, disclosing teeth too white and too even to be anything but 1950 vintage Sears and Roebuck dentures. Her own father had had a pair, which he had called Roebuckers, and from time to time he would push them out at her comically at the supper table. Always. Wendy remembered now, when her mother was out in the kitchen getting something else, or on the telephone. Danny had stared up at this black giant in blue serge, and then had smiled when Halloran picked him up easily, set him in the crook of his elbow, and said, "You ain't gonna stay up here all winter." "Yes, I am," Danny said with a shy grin. "No, you're gonna come down to St. Pete's with me and learn to cook, and go out on the beach every damn evening watching for crabs, right?" Danny giggled delightedly and shook his head no. Halloran set him down. "If you're gonna change your mind," Halloran said, bending over him gravely, "you better do it quick. 30 minutes from now, I'm in my car. 2.5 hours after that, I'm sitting at gate 32, Concourse B, Stapleton International Airport, in the mile-high city of Denver, Colorado. 3 hours after that, I'm renting a car at the Miami airport and on my way to sunny St. Pete's, waiting to get into my swim trunks and just laughing up my sleeve at anybody stuck and caught in the snow. You dig it, my boy?" "Yes, sir," Danny said, smiling. Halloran turned to Jack and Wendy. "Looks like a fine boy there." "We think he'll do," Jack said, and offered his hand. Halloran took it. "I'm Jack Torrance. My wife Winifred. Danny you've met." "And a pleasure it is. Ma'am, are you a Winnie or a Freddie?" "I'm a Wendy," she said, smiling. "Okay, that's better than the other two, I think. Right this way. Mr. Ullman wants you to have the tour." "The tour you'll get." He shook his head and said under his breath, and won't I be glad to see the last of him." Halloran commenced to tour them around the most immense kitchen Wendy had ever seen in her life. It was sparkling clean. Every surface was coaxed to a high gloss. It was more than just big. It was intimidating. She walked at Halloran's side while Jack, wholly out of his element, hung back a little with Danny. A long wallboard hung with cutting instruments, which went all the way from paring knives to two-handed cleavers, hung beside a four-basin sink. There was a breadboard as big as their Boulder apartment's kitchen table. An amazing array of stainless steel pots and pans hung from the floor to the ceiling, covering one whole wall. "I think I'll have to leave a trail of breadcrumbs every time I come in," she said. "Don't let it get you down," Halloran said. "It's big, but it's still only a kitchen. Most of this stuff you'll never even have to touch. Keep it clean. That's all I ask. Here's the stove I'd be using if I was you. There are 3 of them in all, but this is the smallest." Smallest, she thought dismally, looking at it. There were 12 burners, 2 regular ovens, and a Dutch oven, a heated well on top in which you could simmer sauces or bake beans, a broiler and a warmer, plus a million dials and temperature gauges. "All gas," Halloran said. "You cooked with gas before, Wendy?" "Yes." "I love gas," he said, and he turned one of the burners. Blue flame popped into life, and he adjusted it down to a faint glow with a delicate touch. "I like to be able to see the flame you're cooking with. You see where all the surface burner switches are?" "Yes." "And the oven dials are all marked. Myself, I favor the middle one because it seems to heat the most even. But you use whichever one you like, or all 3 for that matter." "A TV dinner in each one," Wendy said, and laughed weakly. Halloran roared, "Go right ahead if you like. I left a list of everything edible over by the sink. You see it?" "Here it is, Mommy." Danny brought it over 2 sheets of paper, written closely on both sides. "Good boy," Halloran said, taking it from him and ruffling his hair. "You sure you don't want to come to Florida with me, my boy? Learn to cook the sweetest shrimp creole this side of paradise." Danny put his hands over his mouth and giggled and retreated to his father's side. "You 3 folks could eat up for a year, I guess," Halloran said. "We got a cold pantry, a walk-in freezer, all sorts of vegetable bins, and 2 refrigerators. Come on, let me show you." For the next 10 minutes, Halloran opened bins and doors, disclosing food in such amounts as Wendy had never seen before. The food supplies amazed her, but did not reassure her as much as she might have thought. The Donner Party kept reoccurring to her, not with thoughts of cannibalism. With all this food, it would indeed be a long time before they were reduced to such poor rations to eat each other. But with the reinforced idea that this was indeed a serious business, when snow fell, getting out of here would not be a matter of an hour's drive to Sidewinder, but a major operation. They would sit up here in this deserted, grand hotel, eating the food that had been left them like creatures in a fairy tale, and listening to the bitter wind around their snowbound eaves. In Vermont, when Jack had broke Danny's arm, she had called the emergency medic squad, dialing the number from the little card attached to the phone. They had been at the house only 10 minutes later. There were other numbers written on that little card. You could have a police car in 5 minutes, a fire truck in even less time than that, because the fire station was only 3 blocks away and 1 block over. There was a man to call if the lights went out, a man to call if the shower stopped, a man to call if the TV went on the fritz. But what would happen up here if Danny had one of his fainting spells and swallowed his tongue? Oh God, what a thought. What if the place caught on fire? If Jack fell down the elevator shaft and fractured his skull? What if we have a wonderful time now? Stop it, Wendy. Winifred. Halloran showed them into the walk-in freezer first, where their breath puffed out like a comic strip balloons. In the freezer, it was as if winter had already come. Hamburger in big plastic bags, 10 pounds in each bag, a dozen bags, 40 whole chickens hanging from a row of hooks in the wooden planked walls, canned hams stacked up like poker chips, a dozen of them. Below the chickens, 10 roasts of beef, 10 roasts of pork, and a huge leg of lamb. You like lamb, Doc? Halloran asked, grinning. I love it, Danny said immediately. He had never had it. I knew you did. There's nothing like 2 good slices of lamb on a cold night with some mint jelly on the side. You've got the mint jelly here, too. Lamb eases the belly. It's a non-contentious sort of meat. From behind them, Jack said curiously, How did you know we called him Doc? Halloran turned around. Pardon? Danny. We call him Doc sometimes. Like in the Bugs Bunny cartoons? Looks sort of like a doc, doesn't he? He wrinkled his nose at Danny, smacked his lips, and said, what's up, a doc? Danny giggled, and then Halloran said something. Sure you don't want to go to Florida, Doc? To him very clearly. He heard every word. He looked at Halloran, startled and a little scared. Halloran winked solemnly and turned back to the food. Wendy looked from the cook's broad, serge-clad back to her son. She had the oddest feeling that something had passed between them. Something she could not quite follow. You've got 12 packages of sausage, 12 packages of bacon, Halloran said. So much for the pig. In this drawer, 20 pounds of butter. Real butter? Jack asked. The A number 1. I don't think I've had real butter since I was a kid back in Berlin, New Hampshire. Well, you'll eat it up here until Olio seems a treat. Halloran said and laughed. Over this bin, you've got your bread. 30 loaves of white. 20 of dark. We try to keep a racial balance at the Overlook, don't you know? Now, I know 50 loaves won't take you through, but there's plenty of makings, and fresh is better than frozen any day of the week. Down here you got your fish, brain food, right, Doc? Is it, Mom? Mr. Halloran says so, honey, she smiled. Danny wrinkled his nose. I don't like fish. You're dead wrong, Halloran said. You just never had any fish that you liked. Or that liked you. This fish here will like you fine. 5 pounds of rainbow trout. 10 pounds of turbot. 15 cans of tuna fish. Oh yeah, I like tuna. And 5 pounds of the sweetest tasting sole that ever swam in the sea. My boy, when next spring rolls around, you're gonna thank old... He snapped his fingers as if he had forgotten something. What's my name now? I guess it just slipped my mind. Mr. Halloran, Danny said, grinning. Dick to your friends. That's right. And you being a friend, you make it Dick. As he led them into the far corner, Jack and Wendy exchanged a puzzled glance, both of them trying to remember if Halloran had told them his first name. And this here I put in special, Halloran said. Hope you folks enjoy it. Oh, really? You shouldn't have, Wendy said, touched. It was a 20-pound turkey wrapped in a wide scarlet ribbon with a bow on top. "You've got to have your turkey on Thanksgiving, Wendy," Halloran said gravely. "I believe there's a captain back here somewhere for Christmas." Cap'n? "Doubtless you'll stumble on it. Let's come on out of here now before we all catch the pneumonia." "Right, Doc?" "Right." There were more wonders in the cold pantry. 100 boxes of dried milk. Halloran advised her gravely to buy fresh milk for the boy in Sidewinder as long as it was feasible. 5 20-pound bags of sugar, a gallon jug of black strap molasses, cereals, glass jugs of rice, macaroni, spaghetti, rank cans of fruit and fruit salad, a bushel of fresh apples that scented the whole room with autumn, dried raisins, prunes, and apricots. "You gotta be regular if you want to be happy," Halloran said, and pealed with laughter at the cold pantry ceiling, where one old-fashioned light globe hung down with an iron chain. A deep bin filled with potatoes, a smaller caches of tomatoes, onions, turnips, squashes, and cabbages. "My word," Wendy said as they came out. But seeing all that fresh food, after her $30-a-week grocery budget, so stunned her that she was unable to say just what her word was. "I'm running a bit late," Halloran said, checking his watch, "so I'll just let you go through the cabinets and the fridges as you get settled in. There's cheeses, canned milk, sweetened condensed milk, yeast, baking soda, a whole bag full of those table talk pies, a few bunches of bananas that ain't even near to ripe yet." "Stop," she said, holding up a hand and laughing. "I'll never remember it all. It's supper, and I promise to leave the place clean." "That's all I ask." He turned to Jack. "Did Mr. Ullman give you the rundown on the rats in his belfry?" Jack grinned. "He said there was possibly some in the attic, and Mr. Watson said there might be some more down in the basement. There must be 2 tons of paper down there, but I didn't see any shredded, as if they'd been using it to make nests." "That Watson," Halloran said, shaking his head in mock sorrow, "ain't he the foulest talking man you ever ran on?" "He's quite a character," Jack agreed. His own father had been the foulest talking man Jack had ever run on. "Sort of a pity," Halloran said, leading them back down the wide, swinging doors that gave on the overlooked dining room. "There was money in that family long ago. It was Watson's granddad, or great-granddad, I can't remember which, that built this place." "So I was told," Jack said. "What happened?" Wendy asked. "Well, they couldn't make it go," Halloran said. "Watson will tell you the whole story, twice a day if you let him. The old man got a bee in his bonnet about the place. He let it drag him down, I guess. He had 2 boys, and one of them was killed in a riding accident on the grounds while the hotel was still a building. That would have been 1908 or '09. The old man's wife died of the flu, and then it was just the old man and his youngest son. They ended up getting took back on as caretakers in the same hotel the old man had built." "It is sort of a pity," Wendy said. "What happened to him, the old man?" Jack asked. "He plugged his father into a light socket by mistake, and that was the end of him. Oh, he plugged his finger into a light socket, which would make more sense," Halloran said. "Sometime in the early 30s, before the Depression closed this place down for 10 years. Anyway, Jack, I'd appreciate if you and your wife would keep an eye out for the rats in the kitchen as well. If you should see them, traps, not poison." Jack blinked. Of course, who'd want to put rat poison in the kitchen? Halloran laughed derisively. "Mr. Ullman, that's who." That was the brightest idea last fall. I put it to him. I said, what if we all get up here next May, Mr. Ullman, and I serve the traditional opening night dinner, which just happens to be salmon in a very nice sauce, and everybody gets sick, and the doctor comes and says to you, Ullman, what have you been doing up here? You got 80 of the richest folks in America suffering from rat poisoning. Jack threw his head back and bellowed with laughter. What did Ullman say? Halloran tucked his tongue into his cheek as if feeling for a bit of food there. He said, get some traps, Halloran. This time they all laughed, even Danny, although he was not completely sure what the joke was, except it had something to do with Mr. Ullman, who didn't know everything after all. The four of them passed through the dining room, empty and silent now, with its fabulous western exposure on the snow-dusted peaks. Each of the white linen tablecloths had covered with a sheet of tough, clear plastic. The rug, now rolled up for the season, stood in one corner like a sentinel on guard duty. Across the wide room was a double set of bat-wing doors, and over them an old-fashioned sign lettered in gilt script, The Colorado Lounge. Following his gaze, Halloran said, If you're a drinking man, I hope you brought your own supplies. This place is picked clean. Employees' party last night, you know. Every maid and bellhop in this place is going around with a headache today. Me included. I don't drink, Jack said shortly. They went back to the lobby. It had cleared greatly during the half-hour they'd spent in the kitchen. The long main room was beginning to take on the quiet, deserted look that Jack supposed they would become familiar with soon enough. The high-backed chairs were empty. The nuns who had been sitting by the fire were gone, and the fire itself was down to a bed of comfortably glowing coals. Wendy glanced out into the parking lot and saw that all but a dozen cars had disappeared. She found herself wishing that they could get back in the VW and go back to Boulder. Or anywhere else. Jack was looking around for Ullman, but he wasn't in the lobby. A young maid with her ash-blonde hair pinned up on her neck came over. Your luggage is out on the porch, Dick. Thank you, Sally. He gave her a peck on the forehead. You have yourself a good winter. Getting married, I hear. He turned to the Torrances as she strolled away, backside twitching pertly. I've got to hurry along if I'm going to make that plane. I don't want to wish you all the best. No, you'll have it. Thanks, Jack said. You've been very kind. I'll take good care of your kitchen, Wendy promised again. Enjoy Florida. I always do, Halloran said. He put his hands on his knees and bent down to Danny. Last chance, Guy. Want to come to Florida? I guess not, Danny said, smiling. Okay. Like to give me a hand out to my car with my bags? If Mommy says I can. You can, Wendy said, but you'll have to have that jacket buttoned. She leaned forward to do it, but Halloran was ahead of her, his large brown fingers moving with smooth dexterity. I'll send him right back in, Halloran said. Fine, Wendy said, and followed them to the door. Jack was still looking around for Ullman. The last of the Overlook's guests were checking out at the desk. That's the end of part 1 of chapter 10, and we're going to start chapter 11. It's called The Shining. So if you want to know what The Shining is, and you want to hear about probably the conversation that Halloran and Danny are going to have, I guess look at the next video. I don't know if I'm really going to post this online. I might get too shy and not do it. But if so, see chapter 11, which is going to be part 2 for anyone that came in late to the story. Thanks. Signing off. Or whatever.